Sorry for those who couldn't get on initially. Obviously took attendance, did the pledge, a moment of silence, read the comments from the public on agenda items. Just a reminder for those members of the public in attendance, this is an opportunity for the members of the public to comment on our items. Members of the public also have an opportunity at the end of the evening to ask questions, concerns, or comments on matters not formally noted on the agenda, and we appreciate everyone's cooperation. You can use the BOE comments at menands.org. Once again, BOE comments at menands.org is the email address to send your questions in. I don't see any. We do have a period at the end of the evening's agenda to talk about items, so if there are questions not answered, they'll be at the end. So we will move along to approval of the minutes. Looks like we have several meetings that we had last month. Any questions or corrections that noted for the previous meetings for the last month? Anyone?
I see.
All right then, I need a resolution, please.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education remains open for the school district, set the minutes of the October 13th, 2020 meeting and the October 22nd, 2020, and November 5th, 2020 special meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution carries. Long communication to the board from Mr. Evans. Talk about that in the update, or we want to?
No, if I could share a couple comments here. I'm just trying to get to a spot where everybody can see me and hear me. We have two communications from Mr. Nevins, and I think it is important to clarify it as Mr. Nevins wearing a different hat. Mr. Nevins representing the Menands Youth Sports, correct? Okay. So Mr. Nevins had inquired of the board relative to improvements to the gymnasium for the benefit of our student athletes and community athletes who use the facility. You may recall that back in the spring, at the close of last school year, we were positioned to be able to do some much needed repairs to the hoops, and at that time also make them adjustable for our smaller ball players so that they could be adjusted as needed. At least two of the six, and it created a full court. There was some conversation and discussion at that time about also being able to make improvements to the floor finish. Normally, in a typical year, we do refinish the floor every year. We do not repaint it. I'll be honest, we have not done that in the last 3 years because in many ways the gymnasium has been used as a staging space during the building project. So it definitely would need to be refinished as it typically would. I would also point out that over the course of those 3 years, we've in some ways generated some savings, even though it's been over a number of years for not having had the floors done. We did have a gentleman come in and give us a quote for not only refinishing, but repainting the floors to make it more representative of our school colors, and our school mascot. And he came forth with a quote that I felt was pretty reasonable, and was able to vet that with the gentleman who did the other repairs to the gym as well. Normally it would be a heavy lift financially, but the youth group is saying they may be able to assist us in sharing the cost of that. And right now, having had conversations with Kathy in our business office, knowing that we have had some typical clubs and sports that we would have run this fall, that we cannot in the current circumstances for reasons beyond our own control, I do believe it would be an opportune time to take advantage of that if indeed we could get matching funds. In my mind, it's almost a silver lining to a bad situation where we may be able to take the gains from that financially, roll them into the upgrades to the gym floor, and that will be able to support kids and teams for years to come. So I think that is something I'll need to get some feedback from the board on before we move forward. I don't know if folks have things they want to share now, and then we can follow up with any board action that would be needed in December.
Just for clarification, clarification, my apologies, Bill, that there was a email dated September 23rd before, but you didn't get it, you didn't get copied on it, so
That's on me.
okay, so just know that there was the inaction was not based on communication and not knowing it, it just.
Actually, I didn't know everyone did get it.
So when you look.
I got it.
Well, you sent it.
You got it this time.
No, but
You
you
didn't get it back in
sent an email
September.
that-
Oh, the one in September did go, oh, okay.
Correct.
You said all of that along with notification, but we didn't get copies of it. So that's what I'm saying, we didn't act not because we didn't know it, just so you knew that, just for clarification's sake. My only question is, and I'm fully supportive of, obviously, athletic and PE facilities for our kids and our teachers. Is there anything outside of the flooring that we're looking to do, or are we just doing flooring, or I've heard talk of padding and all these?
So there's a part 2 and a part 3, I would guess.
Okay.
So I'll address those questions and then ask any others. While Mike Cruz was here to do the repairs to the gym, the hoops that was already done, he also came back when he did the last pieces and he said, if you wanted to do the upgrades to the padding, let me give you a quote to do that. He has come forward with that quote. It's a pretty sizable dollar amount, $24,000. It would look really sharp. I would like to kind of table that one for now and wait and see where we sit at the end of this fiscal year and see if we have made additional gains. There's a lot of pieces and parts that are moving that we don't know. It is something I would love to do for our school, for our kids, and for our gym. But that one, if I had to give you my perspective, I would say let's wait on that one. The second piece, and it's the second communication from Mr. Nevins, is relative to the scoreboard and replacing the scoreboard. I did get a very loose quote for that, comparable to what we have now, would be in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $6,000. And part of the inquiry from Mr. Nevins was around if somebody was interested, a local business, in potentially sponsoring that, would that be allowable? I did have the opportunity to reach out to our legal counsel and confirm that yes, indeed, that would be allowable under certain auspices and guidance. Did that answer your question, Jeff?
So I answered it, I know in the past, having private company names on things that they don't know, so what I guess what has changed regulation to allow that or permit that, so we can do that. Happy to hear it.
So I'm going to read the response from our council, and they also said they are willing to do a memo to the board outlining it in more detail should we need it. The quick answer is the board may accept a corporate donation to sponsor the purchase or expense of something like a scoreboard, and the district may acknowledge the corporation's gift through a plaque or other signage, even on the scoreboard itself. So yes, I agree with you. That's a change from what I used to know.
All I know about that is in the past, and I'm going to use Coca-Cola as a reference. Coca-Cola gave scoreboards to everyone because they were trying to advertise Coca-Cola. And that's not necessarily a problem. It's a problem when it says, buy Coca-Cola.
Correct.
Right? There's certain words you can't actually put on the signs, let's say an insurance agent, buy Allstate. That's where that wording of a corporate sponsor becomes an issue in a school. But the fact that Allstate is on the back or on the side of the scoreboard, and we're using their scoreboard, that's really not the issue. Again,
And it goes on to say,
that was my understanding when I looked into it.
it goes on to say in here that commercial sponsorship, which is what we're talking about, does not cross the line into commercial advertisement or promotion.
Right, because there were certain laws on the books, like pouring rights back in the early 2000s that got taken away. For obese reasons. There were states like Texas that had Kentucky Fried Chicken and Taco Bell as their food sponsors for their kids' cafeteria. So I'm going to that, but I'm glad to hear that changed, because then obviously that opens up opportunities like our sign out front there. I like to hear that. Very happy for that.
Are we looking at a 50-50 split between the school and fundraising?
For the floor, that is what I understand.
So the floor is the flooring and the paint, right?
Correct.
Right, they would strip it back down to wood, repaint, put the school logo on, maybe, Menands, make it look like a gym, right? And then resurface it with the And it's very difficult in the beginning. I think I mentioned this to Dr. Long, I don't know if you've also mentioned, heard it. Very difficult to go out to a sponsor and say, hey, we need money because we want to do this. Well, how much money do you need? Well, I'm not really sure because the school may or may not be able to participate or contribute some. So after the board decides what avenue they want to go, if we're going to talk about the floor first, then I go out and secure the rest of the funding. And talking with Mike, they would be able to do it without getting all the money up front and finish getting paid on the back end because now's the time to do it.
Yeah, and I will say, we're gonna have to defer to our auditors and fiscal folks to find out how exactly.
Let's get this done now. But it is something that could be done, and if it is a split, then it's much easier to say, this is the number we need to reach, and then I can get sponsorship for that.
What is timing on something like that?
I think they could get it done this year and they could get it done over a break. I've had some initial conversation until, you know, I had a more definitive, are we going to move forward? Then I can start to have some of the more granular conversations in that regard.
And I don't know if another month makes a difference either way, beyond that this needs to be another discussion item or more information after the fact.
I'd like to get a pulse from all the board members if they're, and right now we're just talking, I think, about the floor and the other pieces come later, but just to get an initial sense on there, and then I can find out what, if any, action we need to take based on the funding that's involved, or we can simply move forward with it.
I'm okay with it. I think it makes sense to do it now, not using it. I think it makes sense. And I'm just worried we get plastic. That's pretty.
Especially since we, have to increase the funds for not having floods in the fall.
All right, then I will follow up on the floor piece.
I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I guess is everybody probably wants numbers, the breakdown and all that stuff. Talking conceptually, we understand that none of those numbers, but that's great. There's a breakdown.
Okay, so more to come. We won't rush it. We'll dot all our i's and cross our t's, but we'll plan to move forward with the floor and revisit the other possibilities as we learn more as the year progresses.
Yes, even I'm having a hard time hearing you. I know I'm on the other side of the room.
You might want to pull that mic
Try
right
to
up.
talk a little louder.
Me or
Yeah,
can you hear me?
You're difficult to hear. Even if I'm getting the bill is coming through just fine. That's what
Take his mic away. It's my
And that's-
voice. I want to say it once and be done.
that's probably the least high end of the 3 mics we have, so.
And I have to quiet his voice. Next time, do it.
We'll switch the mics out next time. All right.
Thank you.
All set, folks, on that?
Board had that.
All right, let me, and you're gonna do a lot of talking, Jeff, so I'm gonna point towards you and talk loud.
All right. So that, we'll move along to business matters. We have a couple of discussion items here today. We've got a long-range plan, we have a building project update. Dr. Long?
Okay, so we have Jason Swartz with us from Bernie Donigan's office. Just give us a minute to get situated here. The board members all have a copy of his presentation in your packet. We are going to try to display it up here for the folks in person here and the folks watching from home. And I think what I would ask Jason to do, hold on, I gotta get that one before. What I would ask Jason to do is come up here and sit in close proximity here, and if members of the board want to see what's actually on the board and in their packet, there is enough flexibility in seating.
Is it all right if I just stand right here so I can click through the? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So, good evening, everybody. Good to see you again. I know I was here, fairly recently, but just as a reintroduction, in case, Jason Schwartz from Bernard Donigan Incorporated, District's financial advisors. Obviously, we've been here a lot in the past for the capital project, and one of the newer things we've been doing with the district, and the reason we're here tonight is for the long-range plan. I know everybody has a copy of the presentation, but I did add a few things to the PowerPoint just to kind of call attention to specific areas that we want you to look at, because it's a lot of information we're going to go through in a short amount of time. So some of the animations I added will help just draw your attention to some of the key spots. So you're welcome to move out as you have so you can see a little bit better. So first, before we get started, thank you to Dr. Long and Kathy. They did a lot of work with us in kind of the lead up to this presentation to kind of go through some of the key questions we had for updating the numbers. So they've seen this presentation a couple times already and have been very instrumental in helping us pull those numbers together. So starting into the presentation, a couple of reminders just as we like to kind of reset the table on what is a long-range financial analysis or a long-range plan. The primary goal of it is we're trying to look out into the future and project future general fund revenues and expenditures to get a picture of what's coming in the short term for the district in the next 5 years. Helps us start to take a look at, are there any trends in terms of expenditures or revenues that we need to be aware of, and how do they affect the district in terms of future planning. Long-range plans are not static documents. I think one thing I've heard Dr. Long say, I'm sure you've all heard her say as well, is we have to go from what we know today. We're gonna go through that today, but a lot of things can change, especially this year. There's obviously a lot going on with the pandemic, with state aid, a lot of uncertainty. So we'll give the best information we have tonight. And if we need to revisit, then we can certainly do that update, next year or at an interim period, if that makes sense. Like budgets, it's something that's good to track and update regularly. But one thing not on this slide that's a key point is it is different than a budget, right? We're not setting the budget for the next 5 years. We're trying to say what do we expect in terms of actual results. Your budget for other reasons, you have to be a little bit more conservative than what we're going to do tonight in terms of kind of building in contingencies for other things that can come up during the year, special ed students who move in, additional costs. Once the voter approves that budget, you can't go beyond that in that given year. So we're not, you don't want to kind of cut right down to the bone of what we're looking at tonight with the long-range plan when you build your budget, but it kind of gets you going in the right direction and gives you an idea of things to watch for. So that kind of sets the stage. Before we get into the projections on the general fund side, we do always like to kind of just circle back and touch on the capital plan. That is a fairly big piece of your budget in terms of your capital side, and it's also important because of the impact it has on the tax cap. So we'll just kind of do a quick refresher for you here. I know you guys have seen this document plenty of times. The current capital project, we're almost there, almost done. We've got all of it financed at this point. And the last key thing is we're working with the district and CSRs to do those final cost reports by this December, and we're well on our way to doing that. So just a reminder, I think we covered this in September, but the bond, you guys got a phenomenal rate on that. 1.537% for 15 years on a bond is just unheard of. So that's a fantastic benefit for the district, especially when you consider the other thing I didn't highlight here, but you're getting 2.5% is the assumed rate for the aid that the district is, or that the state is paying you, which is based on statewide numbers. So you're getting aided as if you bonded at 2.5% and you only bonded at 1.5%. So that's a nice benefit for the district where you're getting some extra dollars there. So all good news there. In terms of what that bond looks like in the project as we wrap up here and kind of look at the big picture and the long-term outlook from the capital side, you can see when we went to the public, if you recall, we were thinking we might be up around 442,000 local share when all was said and done with this project. And we actually, when we bonded, because of that great rate we got on the bond, we're now down to around 390 or 400,000. So that impact that we told the residents when we first went out for that project a few years ago, we actually came in even better than that. So that's great news. And one other piece of good news and kind of just planting the seed for future thought is we do have a drop off in the local share coming in out in 27, 28 timeframe. So you can see that right there. So we can start to think about that now. We've got plenty of time, but there is an opportunity in the future where we can start to plan for another project to fill in that drop and have, more work done in the facilities for items that are needed without a substantial financial impact on the taxpayers. And one way we start planning for that, this is another way you can kind of see that for the visual learners, if the numbers don't show it as well as we've got this bar chart. So you can see where that arrow is. That's where we want to start planning for a possible next project to fill in that drop off in the debt service from the current bond. And one way we start to do that, this is a useful tool that we use with a lot of our districts. We start to look at a generic timeline and say, when would we need to vote in order to try to hit that drop off? So we kind of work backwards. We say, hey, we know if we want to have debt service in 27, 28, because that's where that drop off is going to be, let's work backwards through all these other key steps that we need. And there's a lot of information there, but what really you want to focus in on is if we want to hit that drop off, then we want to vote probably somewhere around December of 24. So that's kind of a good target. And if the district needs something different, that's what we're here for, is to figure out ways to accomplish that. But in the back of your mind right now, you can start to think a few years out, December 24 might be a good time for a future project to take advantage of that drop off.
What if the governor bond cut off October 1st, 2026?
Sorry, what was that?
There's a note on there that says governor bond cut off October 1st, 2026. What is that?
Yeah, that's when we're doing a project. In order to get into the building aid runs, to start to get the aid on the project, we have to do a form called an SA 139, which basically notifies the state that we've awarded contracts, and that's an October 1st date. So
That's in order to get the aid the following year.
for the following year for that project specifically. All your other projects, we've already done those forms, so they're all set.
Right. Okay.
Yep. Okay. So that's kind of a reset on where we are on the capital side of things, and then that all kind of filters through to the rest of the presentation tonight. So transitioning more into the long-range plan itself, one place we like to start with that is kind of looking at what have you done for the last couple of years? What are your fund balances doing? So we've got it broken down here between the different categories of fund balance. You've got your restricted fund balance, which often you think of as reserves is another term for that. So you got a bunch of those. Non-spendable districts don't tend to have a ton of that. Committed, assigned, and then the unassigned, that's that 4% fund balance that you hear people talk about a lot in terms of kind of what's generally encouraged by the comptroller's office. So a couple key things to look at here. One thing we did put in is we threw a capital reserve in here. You don't have one right now. That's something you have to go to the voters to establish to be able to fund a capital reserve. But we did want to put that here to talk about tonight, to think about for the future, whether it's this upcoming May, next May, but at some point in the future, you may want to consider establishing a reserve so you can start to put some money away if you have some good years and have the ability to do that for that possible next vote in December 24 to help further minimize the impact to the public. So that's one thing you might want to consider. Obviously, you have a number of other reserves that are pretty well established and funded there. So that's all good.
Point out, that's
What kind of funds would the capital reserve, like, for cap on, for a certain amount per year, or what's the?
Yep.
Yeah, and we actually did that prior to this recent project. So that was a question Jason and I discussed when we met earlier, and I'll let him speak further to it. But when we bring it to the voters, we both set the limit.
Yep.
And you can talk more about what those limits can be. And then what we are going to fund it at that point.
Right. So when you do a capital reserve, you have to go to the voters to establish the reserve. And when you do that, you will set a limit for how much it can be funded to. So whether that's 500,000, $1 million, 5 million, whatever that number is, that sets the upper limit of how much you can put in that reserve. And you set a term, and it's typically 10 years is how long you can establish a reserve for. Then after the reserve has been established, it can be funded by board action. So if you have surpluses at the end of a year, or if you want to budget for funding that, then that's how you put the money.
Could we take their reserve money, put some in there?
And we took some of the debt service from the prior project.
Yeah, so you can do that. That's generally atypical. You don't see that as much. Typically, it's funded by surplus funds from the annual budget. And then you do also need voter approval to take the money out of the reserve. And that's usually done as part of the larger capital project vote, but that's kind of how the reserve works. Okay. So that was one thing we did just want to point out is food for thought, just to keep in mind for possible future action. But as far as the numbers here go, the other thing that we like to look at is this, really the bottom line number here. What's your fund balance doing? And you can see over the past few years, you had from 18 to 19, you were pretty stable, and from 19 to 20, you even added to your fund balance. So that's a good trend that we like to see, especially given the current climate when there's a lot of uncertainty and we don't know what's happening. We don't already want to be in a structural deficit with our budget before we even have some of these other new topics coming at us. So that's a good trend. And I look back even a little further than what we have on here, and that's been a continued trend where you guys have been pretty much neutral or small surpluses with your budget for a few years now. So that's a good sign. One other thing just to point out, I'm sure you're all aware, but on the unassigned fund balance or unappropriated fund balance, you guys are a little bit over the 4%. Now, I think that's fine. That's kind of one of those things where, you're going to get your hand slapped if comptroller's office comes in, but yeah, 4% is not a one size fits all, right? If you have a smaller budget, 4% is a lot less than a very large budget from some of the larger districts. So it doesn't allow you to put that much away for the unknown. So not uncommon to be over it, but just wanted to point out that, if comptroller's office does come in, that would likely be a point that happens. Yep.
12 years, but that's all you want.
It's rare to get yelled at for saving too much money, right? Good problem to have. All right, so that's kind of looking back. So now starting to spin forward and look at where things are going. So the first page we have here is the state aid projections. Now, when we get to the revenue page, this all collapses down to just one line, but there is a lot of stuff that goes into it. So that's why we give it its own page. So these are all the different state aid categories you have, and I'm not going to go through every single one of them. A lot of them are kind of smaller categories and are pretty stable year over year. But a few key assumptions we're making with the state aid projections. So that very first line, foundation aid, this year we are leaving that flat. We're saying we don't really know what's going on. It might go, it was flat this year. It may continue that way. So conservatively, we've assumed no increases to state aid from the foundation aid side. Last year, we had looked back and we said about $7,500 a year was your average increase. So, if the state rebounds and we can start having more aid again, then that could be a possibility that maybe it turns out better than this. But taking a conservative look at it, we said no increases, just keep it flat. Another big change this year from last year was your transportation aid. And this has a corresponding impact on the expense side. So we'll see that a little later, but you are seeing an increase in transportation aid, and that's because your services went up, the expenses, and you do get aided on that. Now it's not 100% aided, so it does impact the bottom line, but at least you are seeing that increase kind of come through from, you're at about 360,000, you're gonna be up to about 450 by the time that fully hits on next year. And then the last big increase on the state aid side is obviously the building aid, which we covered in detail earlier. You see that's going to go up substantially this year and next year, and that's just that project coming on, the aid for the 8.8 million. Okay. So then getting to the revenues as a whole, the key assumptions here on the revenue page, again, we have the state aid is coming through from that prior page. So that's, one of the big numbers there. And then the single biggest number you have for revenues is your tax levy. That's basically 7.3 million out of your, roughly $9 million revenue side budget is coming from the tax levy. So what we've assumed in this projection tonight is that you would go out in all future years at the cap. And we'll get to the specific numbers when we get to the tax cap page we have later on, but it's roughly 2.25% to 3.25% increases from year to year, depending on the numbers. But one thing I think we talked about last year, and just as a reminder this year, that's pretty important, especially when you have expenses going up, many of which are out of your control, and you have this cap on you. When you leave money on that table, that really has a compounding effect and hurts the district. So for now, we've assumed for these projections that you would go out to the cap each. We don't need to exceed the cap. We're not assuming that at all, but we're just going to kind of keep ticking along at the steady amount of whatever's allowed under the cap. Okay.
Does the tax line figure the increase from all the laws?
Sorry, was that?
That's not gonna come on in this timeframe.
No.
With that incrementally, 20, 40, 60, but it won't hit full until the end of that.
Are we in the 6th year or something?
It's the 12th year. I think we're in, 12, yeah, it starts to hit after 8.
Oh, okay, it's 8 years.
Right, we stay
I thought it
flat.
was a 10-year thing and we called it at 6.
No, it's 8 and a total of 12, I believe.
Okay.
But also that doesn't increase our revenue, that just decreases tax for non-residents, right? If I understand that correctly, isn't property tax, total property tax?
Right. What are you guys talking about right now?
So there is a apartment development, no, it's not a pilot, it's a 483 urban. It's an urban exemption. So village, the town and the district agreed to a 12-year, and it's like, I'm gonna forget the numbers. I wanna say it's 483B or 483C, and there's certain parameters around it. So for the first 8 years, they continue to pay the taxes as they gain the property.
He doesn't know who they, it's an apartment complex, right?
Yes. Yeah, I said that. And then in year 8, it begins to go back in 20% increments
To the full
to the
assessed
full at the
value.
end of the 12th year.
Right. Yeah, so that the levy is what the levy is, right? You're going to decide what you want the levy to be, and then if your assessed value or your equalized value of your district as a whole goes up, then that decreases the rate per thousand, for the individual homeowner. So it can help spread the burden, but it doesn't change what we want to do for the tax levy for the bottom line. But it'll help make the rate not go up as much as it would otherwise if you have some things coming on that increase your assessment. Yeah. All right, so that covers the revenue page. Again, not a lot going on there. So then getting to the expenditure page, obviously your expenditure side budget is much more detailed than this, but for the purposes of tonight, we're gonna stick at a 10,000 foot level and just kind of look at the big trends. A few key areas to focus on this year as we look at the expenses. First of all, we have a couple things going on in the other categories for general support and instruction. If you look back at your actuals for 2020 and then roll forward to what we're expecting for the current year, you can see those are both up over $100,000. A lion's share of that increase, a big impact on those lines is the cost related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So PP&E costs, purchases, for things of that nature, extra cleaning expenses, things like that. So one thing to keep in mind as we look at this plan tonight is we have assumed, since we don't know any better yet, that those are going to be ongoing costs into the future. So we projected those in each of the 5-year future projection. So we'll kind of do a recap at the end, but that's one way that things could improve is if, maybe some of those are one-time expenditures, like if you have plexiglass, things like that, maybe you don't have to buy that every year. Maybe we get a vaccine and everybody, things get back to normal and we don't have as much of those expenses in that way. So there's ways that could improve. For now, we've assumed that those costs are here to stay, until we know better. So that's in there. One other increase in the expenses from last year is, again, this is what we were talking about a minute ago with the transportations. The contract is up quite a bit from what it was in the prior years. We're projecting for the current year that it's not going to be quite as much because you're doing less runs since you don't have all the students coming every single day. So we have assumed a little bit of a scaling off of that, and depending on how the rest of the year goes, maybe it comes in even lower than that expectation, but that's that's kind of why that step in 21 before we get up to that 900,000 or so in the future years. But so that contract's in there. That is a big increase to the expenses, but we do at least get it partially offset by that state aid that was coming back on transportation. And the last big change again is the debt service is going up substantially this year and into the future, and that's for the project. Like we already covered, you're getting the aid to help offset that as well. And that's lower than we had anticipated when we went to the project, so that's a good thing. Okay. So when we take a look at the picture as a whole, here's where things are. And you know, the first thing you see when you see a page like this is a lot of red, right? And that scares people, but this is not uncommon to have this. We're taking a conservative look at things in terms of your expenditures and your revenues. And there are a number of things that we'll go over at the end of the presentation that could make this look better. The key things that are kind of takeaways that I look at, you know, when we do these long range plans with many of our clients is when we get out to the end of the 5 years, you know, it shows that we're going to be in the negative if everything continued exactly as it is. Compared to last year, we were a little bit better than that. We were at like a 300,000 positive fund balance. So if you ask yourself why the change, the couple key things, which are a lot of the points we already hit on, were those extra costs for PP&E and things of that nature. That's about $1 million over the 5 years that we're paying in extra expenditures. That higher transportation contract. And then to the good, the debt service and the local share of the capital project is better than we had anticipated last year because we came in closer to 400,000 a year instead of 440. So that's helping offset a little of that impact. So the other key thing that I look at that, you know, tells me that this isn't as bad as it maybe initially looks on paper is if we stick with going right up to the cap, like we had talked about, you see up here, when we look at revenues versus expenditures, it's getting better every year. And the reason for that, if you go back, I didn't point this out when we were on those slides, but if you go back and look at the revenue page, the average for the 5 years we're projecting, we're at about 2.6, 2.7%. On the expenditure side, we're only at about 1.8%. So if we keep those revenues up, you know, equal with or outpacing the expenditures, then that helps make things look better in the long run, where we get to a point where we keep shrinking that deficit and making things better for the long run. So that's a good trend. What you don't want to see is those things continue to get further and further apart, because that tells you you have an unsustainable problem and you're going to have to make some big structural changes to fix that. So that's a good trend. And if we have, you know, some of these first years where we're being a little conservative, if they turn out better, then there's a good chance that, you know, it's not as bad as it looks 4 or 5 years out. But it's a good reminder to take a look at this, and that's why we do these long range plans, to say we can't just, you know, go give away anything we want in terms of, you know, contractual decisions, new program. We got to take a look and make sure that the things that we're doing, that they're manageable, and we can kind of maintain this trend of keeping the deficits manageable and staying solvent out into the future. Any questions on any of that? That's kind of a good natural spot to stop before we go through some of the last pages.
Yeah, so everything we've got to do with not
Right, there's nothing here as far as like putting additional money in the
I
reserve.
would say that the time that we're headed into budgets, accesses for the public, really the fall of COVID, right, the next 2 years, everybody traveling. So I'm not optimistic that Washington track create
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that.
Yep. Yeah, again, the reserve was not, you know, we're not necessarily saying you definitely are going to put money in there. It's just, right. The thing about the capital reserve is you can't decide at June 30th to create one and fund it, right? So it's nice to have one on the books so you have that option in a year where there's surplus funds. But if not, then you just, you know, look at what you can afford to do project-wise without a down payment if you don't have one. Okay. All right. The last thing on this first scenario is the tax cap page. So again, a lot of information here, but just a couple key things, some points we've already made just to really hammer them home. We're not assuming exceeding the cap in any year with these projections. We're just going right up to it, but not over. So no supermajority votes needed. Right here is the percentages that I was referencing earlier. So it'd be about 2.25% for next year, and then low 3s for all the other years. And that, these are obviously just estimates. They're going to change because we don't know what your tax-based growth factor is going to be, what the allowable levy factor is going to be. So those could go up or down a little bit, but it should get you in the ballpark because we use kind of historical averages for those. So on average, while it might be 1% one year, 4% another year, that's probably a good idea of the average impact. And the real key for this scenario, again, like we've talked about in past years, is we're not leaving anything on the table with the tax cap. That's the tricky thing with the tax cap, is if you just go 2% across the board, but then all of a sudden you hit a year where inflation is lower and now you can only go out at 1%, they don't let you make up that 1% you lost in the future without going for that supermajority. So that's why it's important to try to really stay up at the cap if you can, if it's a reasonable thing to maintain. Okay. So one other thing we took a look at, we did real quick kind of a second scenario just to give an idea of, you may have heard there's a lot of information out there on possible state aid cuts this year. I think we'll know a lot more in the next 1 to 2 months now that we're past the election, see whether there's any additional stimulus bills that'll have an impact on it. But the general number that's been floated out there a lot is 20% cuts in state aid. So we said, let's take a look and see what happens if there's a 20% cut in state aid. How much pain does that cause for the district? So we did throw a couple extra pages in for scenario 2. So you see if you had a 20% cut to foundation aid, it would take you down from 454,000 to 371,000. So it's about 92,000 in terms of a decrease if you take a 20% cut in your foundation aid. That's not nothing. It's not certainly not anything that you'd rather it not happen. But the good news for you as a district is your state aid is a relatively small piece of your budget and your revenues compared to many other districts. So a 20% aid cut for you guys on foundation aid is only about a 1% cut in your revenues, your total revenues, compared to some other districts that are much more aid dependent, less tax levy dependent. That can be a much bigger number and a much more substantial impact. But it's not nothing, so it's something to be aware of. So we did take that and we said, what if we look at our fund balance page again? How does it impact it? Well, that would be, if we assume all the other projections stay the same and we now decrease our state aid by 92,000, then obviously the numbers all go down a little bit. So this scenario right here just assumes a one-time cut to state aid. And you see the fund balance goes down accordingly just by 92,000. Obviously, the unknown is what if that state aid cut is bigger? What if it's sustained? What if it's a few years? So we're not projecting anything out in the future. If that continues, then that could be, lead to a little bit further deterioration of the fund balance. So something we'll have to keep our eye on. If that does seem like it's trending that you're going to have a cut in lower state aid for a while, then that's when you have to start having some of those bigger discussions about what does that mean in terms of where you're at. But the good news is you do have a healthy fund balance to start from, so you have some time to kind of see these next few years through and see where you're at. Okay. So big picture wrap up. Some of these things we've already talked about. Some of them are some new information, but what are some fund balance considerations when we look at that? That's really the key when we're looking at the long range plan, right? Is how are we looking in the long term in terms of fund balance and our ability to kind of continue running our program as we want to. So what could improve the fund balance from what we projected here tonight? Well, there's a few less predictable revenues that we did not include in these projections. So you guys have traditionally gotten some bullet aid from your legislators. You get some homeless aid, homeless reimbursement, and some tuition, which are less predictable revenues. And they're not, as big as the tax levy, so they don't have a huge thing. But when you add them up over 5-6 years, they do, put a dent in that deficit fund balance. So if you get, continue to get those receipts of the less predictable revenues, that would help the bottom line. Like we mentioned, we were not projecting any state aid increases in either scenario. So if things do get kind of back to normal, so to speak, and you get state aid increases, that could help. And we also didn't project any, impact of additional federal stimulus money. So if that were to come through, that would help, but certainly nothing we know about today, so we couldn't project that. Another thing that could help the fund balance is, like we were mentioning earlier, the pandemic-related expenditures. We're predicting that those are staying at 100% for the next 5 years. So if some of those are, purchases you don't have to make every year, maybe you only have to do them every other year. Or if things improve and the situation changes and we don't need as much or any of that expenditure, then that would help us get back to kind of where we thought we were last year in terms of those slight surpluses. So. And then lastly, one other thing that can help is shared services, whether that be, sharing with other municipalities, other school districts, your BOCES, whether it's, looking at your staffing and kind of sharing, resources and maybe, getting some savings through joining there. So, those are some of the things that can help the fund balance. On the flip side, what could worsen the fund balance? What makes the picture worse than we're at tonight? If we have larger than expected or continued state aid cuts, like we talked about, that could impact it. Not as much for you guys as for other districts, since it is a relatively small part, but it does have an impact. Increasing the tax levy at levels lower than allowed by the tax cap would have a much more substantial impact than the state aid side of it, because that's 80-90% of your revenue budget. So when you leave 1% on the table there, that's a much bigger number. That makes it harder to kind of maintain things going forward. And then increasing contractual obligations. Obviously we all know as a district, one of the biggest things that plays into your budget is your people and their salaries and benefits. So we just always want to be, cognizant of any kind of new changes in contractual obligations. What is that doing out into the future in terms of projections? Okay. And then last kind of thoughts on fund balance considerations. Obviously that, when you have those negative fund balances that we see out in the future, if you have some deficit years, one of the ways you manage that as a district is by using reserves and or fund balance. So that's why you have those there. They would help kind of mitigate the impact for a few years. But one important point to keep in mind is that can help delay the impact, but it's not a sustainable long-term solution, because if you're in a deficit fund balance position or a deficit budget, then you can't replenish those reserves. So they're kind of one-time fixes until you make the changes to correct your budget and make it more balanced in the future. So that, just to kind of wrap it up, obviously, the thing with the long range plan is you take a look at where your current position is. You're in a, strong position today, and then we project out in the future. And that's, it's just something to keep in mind, and something that's, worth updating periodically, whether it be annually or every other year, just to see what changes with this and kind of, make sure that you're kind of ahead of making decisions before you get forced into the really difficult ones. Okay. And the last page there, not too important for you since we're already out of the project, but that was just kind of an appendix page showing your building aid ratios for project planning purposes. Okay. So I went through a lot, tried to give a good amount of detail, but I know it's a lot of information to digest in a short amount of time. So do you have any questions? Anything you wanted me to go through in more detail, or circle back on?
We'll be talking more about this in December.
Yeah.
So, how are we doing?
Yeah, I think you guys are in a very good position. This, like I said, when you see that fund balance page, it's kind of eye-opening, right? When you see that red, but from doing a lot of these for a lot of different districts, that's not uncommon. You have, obligations that you have to meet, a lot of, mandated expenses that get put on you, and you have a cap. So it's very hard to manage those things. But I think there's still a fair amount of conservatism in these numbers. They're not as conservative as your budget necessarily, because we don't, we can be a little bit more, kind of digging into the real numbers here, since we're not held to anything, so to speak. But there's still a good amount of conservatism in there without any of those other revenues, with some of the increases on expenditures that we assumed. So I think you guys as a whole are in good shape, where you're not going to be, making any difficult decisions, immediately in the next 1 to 2 years. You have health reserves. You got a good budget and a good history over the last few years of not being in deficit budgets. So you have some, runway to play with. Yep.
All right, I usually let you leave, but I'm gonna make you stay for a couple minutes
Yep.
just through my building project.
Sure, no
update,
problem.
If you don't mind. We'll let everybody get back to their spots. Gotta find my remote control. Jeff, are you ready for me to move on to building project update?
Yeah, just looking at that.
Okay.
Project update.
All right, building project updates, and I did take some notes here because, as Jason alluded to, we are just about to cross that finish line. The site office trailer, if you've been down back, has been removed. There are 3 very small items remaining for completion. The arrival and installation of a door, the arrival and installation of an extended countertop at the school entry, and the arrival of the instrument storage cabinets for the music room. Substantial certificates of completion are being processed. Jason talked about that too. We have finished on time and under budget. We will begin, aid will begin to flow in the current year. Again, that was touched upon in Jason's report. You'll see later on the agenda, only 1 change order, and it is a decrease, and it could very well be our last one. I have to, because this could be our last building project update, I want to thank our board and our community for their vision and support of the project throughout the process. I want to thank our staff and our students for their patience and understanding through the construction process. I'd like to thank our fiscal advisors for their guidance and direction to minimize the impact to our taxpayers, our architectural firm, CS Arch, for their design and construction management. We have created a learning space that will positively serve our students for years to come. Something I'm proud of, something I hope you're proud of, and it's great to see our kids being able to take advantage of that. That's all I have on the bill. You can go now if you want to. But you're welcome to stay should you want to as well.
Have a nice night.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay, we will move along to business process information. So for the information, the board, copies of warrant numbers 16, 17, 20, Fund A, and warrants 8, 9, and Fund H for October 2020. Also included are business office for approval. Several items. Are there any questions before we get into? Okay, so under budget transfers for September and October 2020, can I get a resolution, please?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands Union School District approve the attached budget for September and October 2020.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Move along to the treasurer's report. Proposed for the board's approval is a copy of the treasurer's report for the month ending September 30th, October 31st, 2020 updates. Are there any questions about the treasurer's report?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education school district approves the special report for the month ending September 30th and October 31st, 2020 update.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Global Superintendent's recommendation, Board of Education in accordance with District Policy 6900, authorize the disposition of a Dell laptop for the attached list. Can I get a resolution, please?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands UFSD School District approve the disposal of a Dell laptop which ceased to be of use or value to the district as per the attached list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. One change order this evening. These are very right?
3 less sprinkler heads needed for the fire sprinkler system than anticipated.
And then hopefully that's the last one. Can I get a resolution?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands School District, on the recommendation of the superintendent, hereby approves the following changes as listed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. OCM BOCES Electric and Natural Gas Consortium, post for the information of the board. The memo from Mrs. Seatek to Dr. Long recommending that the district continue its participation in the New York School and Municipality Consortium effective May 1st, 2021. There are no questions. Can I get a resolution?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands Union Free School District accept the resolution as attached is back for the purchase of electricity and natural gas effective May 1, 2021, and ending no later than April 1, 2024.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution carries. I understand taxpayer dollars. Move on to personnel matters. Resignation. Teacher aide, Tanika Pompey. Can I get a resolution, please?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands school district accept and close copy of the email from Tanika Pompey dated October 2020, resigning from her position as a teacher from the Menands school district effective immediately.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution carries. We move along to appointments. Teacher aide, Shannon Devine. Can I get a resolution, please?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands UFSD School District approves Shannon Devine as a teacher aide effective 11/9/2020 through 6/30/21. Information as per the attached revised salary schedule.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Substitute aide, teacher aide, Catherine McTice. Resolution, please.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands School District approves Catherine McKee as a substitute in the 2020-2021 school year. As per the adopted by the salary schedule.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Along to substitute custodians. Can I get a resolution, please?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands Union Free School District approve the following substitute custodian position for the 2020-2021 school year. Remuneration as per revised salary schedule. As listed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries. Substitute food service helper. Can I get a resolution?
Be resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands Union School District approve the following as a substitute service worker for the 2020-2021 school year. Remuneration as per the attached revised salary schedule as listed.
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Food service helper, Tina Yang. Can I get a resolution, please?
Be resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands School District approve Tina Yanni as a food service worker pending parents. Remuneration as per the attached revised salary schedule.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
If I could hop in here, I just have to give a huge shout out to Chef Mike Tehan, because as you see, there's been a lot of movement and some missing pieces in our cafeteria over the last couple of weeks. And Mike has done an amazing job keeping our kids fed and doing what he needs to do to make it work. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that.
Yeah, I would say that the day that I'm on drop off, pick up after my daughter, and I do see Mike once in a while, he does wave, but he looks like he's a very busy man. A lot of good for us. Okay, increased existing hours worked per week. Increased the hours worked per week from the existing 13.75 hours per week to 27.5 hours per week for the cafeteria cashier food service helper position for the 2021 school year. Can I get a resolution, please?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands Union Free School District amount of hours from 13.75 hours per week to 27.5 hours per week for the cafeteria cashier food service helper position for the 2020-2021 school year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. My understanding is that it's just due to COVID, right?
The nature of how we have to deliver breakfast and lunch now to classrooms and kids not coming to the cafeteria in the extended time it takes to do that, coupled with the 2 different arrival times.
Revised non-instructional salary schedule and revised non-instructional salary schedule for the 2020-2020 school year. Can I get a resolution, please, if there are no questions?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands Union Free School District approves the 2020-2021 revised non-instructional salary.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Homework club tutors. Resolution, please.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands School District approve the following club tutors for the 2020-2021 school year at a rate of $25 per hour.
Second.
Listed. Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution passes. Vacation time rollover. Couple. First one, there are no questions. Can I get a resolution, please?
Be resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands Union Free School District approve the following: Kathy Seatek, School Business Manager, and Jean Mentley, Board Clerk, are managerial confidential employees who are entitled to terms and conditions pursuant to an individual benefits policy approved annually by the Board of Education. And Ms. Seatek and Ms. Mentley shall be eligible to roll all unused vacation days from the 2019-2020 school year to the 2020-2021 school year. Said days shall be used in accordance with the terms and conditions outlined in the respective benefits policy.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution carries. Vacation time rollover. Next resolution.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands Union Free School District extends the employment contract of the superintendent of schools, Dr. Maureen Long, allowing for the rollover of unused dated November 9, 2020, a copy of which should be on file with the board clerk.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution carries.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
And folks, you passed out the new ones, right? For the conversation that I said, you have that. Okay, so. All right, Board of Education matters. We've got club sports mentoring, other stipends. It is requested that the board approve the establishment staff member compensation during the 2020-2021 school year for work performed outside of the school day as per the contract. Can I get a resolution?
If I could make a quick comment here, it's a much shorter list than we typically see, because we are limited by things beyond our control, what we can offer, but I am thrilled to be able to offer even just a few things, and appreciative of those folks who have stepped up to try to do those things in a different format, and I do look forward to the possibility of doing more as the year proceeds.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands School District approves the attached list of staff member compensation during 2020-21 school year for work performed outside the regular school day as per the MAT.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. CSE said CSE recommendation. Can I get a resolution, please?
Okay, be it resolved that the Board of Education of the District approves the recommendation.
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Move along to substitute teachers fully cleared. Can I get a resolution?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands Union School District approve the following substitute teachers for the 2020-2020 school year as listed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Move on to North County Shared Services Agreement, Elementary Special Education Services, 2020-2021. Proposed for the board are copies of the 2020-2021 Shared Services Agreement, North County School District to provide elementary special education services for the 2020-2021 school year. Can I get a resolution?
Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Menands Union School District approves the 2020-2021 shared services agreement for the North County Central School District to provide elementary special education services for the 2020-2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution carries. Student matters, class size update as of the 4th of November. Looks like we've got it broken down by person virtual.
I believe that was recommendation of Mr. Diefender for last meeting, so we did do that. But now it's going to change soon, but.
Very healthy, free of festival. Okay, we'll move along to superintendent's comment.
I do have a few, and I took some notes, so bear with me here. And I just commented, those numbers will change in the near future. Changes for K-5 learning options and transportation. We deployed the communication in the survey on October 27th and asked all of our K-5 K-5 families to complete that as soon as possible, but no later than November 14th, which would give us ample time to make the necessary adjustments. To date, we have 123 responses. Jen, our total we're looking for 225, so we still have about another 100 to go. I'll be sending out a reminder via Messenger tomorrow, actually, along with the reminder that we have the day off on Wednesday. And then we will do, closer to the end of the week, some direct outreach to those particular families who have not yet responded. As stated in the past and in communications to the board, this will be very much like starting the year over again and starting from square one. Really, in a lot of ways, we got a little lucky in the beginning. Our numbers fell as we not necessarily wanted to. I would love to have every one of our kids back in the building. I understand folks have different perspectives, but our numbers fell about 50-50, which really assisted us in creating programming. Now, when we have not that many kids who could potentially come back, that's going to shake things up quite a bit. So we will likely need to reconfigure. We may need to reconfigure schedules. We may need to reconfigure teachers or reassign teachers. Certainly, I would anticipate changes in transportation, either with additional runs and or changing current runs too, so that we can continue to achieve social distancing on the bus. So it will be a heavy lift, but I am confident we will continue to be able to create positive learning environments and opportunities for our kids, regardless of the challenges. And we would appreciate everybody's continued support as we work through those changes and the adjustments that will bring. Sure.
Is this going to be the last time parents are allowed to change? I know some school districts are saying this is your choice from now to the end of the year, or you're looking?
I hope not. We have promised our 6-8 folks they would have that same opportunity at the end of the semester.
Yes.
And I would like to do so again for our K-5 students at the end of second trimester.
Okay.
I don't know what is going to change between now and then, and I would hope things would get better and that would make it easier. But for as long as we can offer that opportunity to our parents and our families, I would like to be able to continue to do so if there are not things that bar us from doing that. I'll also say in response to that question, Jen, that we have had some unique circumstances where folks have and families have found a change has necessitated something different, and we have worked, and I give the credit to Ms. Canavo, very hard to facilitate and address their needs. All right, what's next on? I lost my agenda. Okay. Potential for a remote only day. So I think it's been pretty apparent, at least from my perspective, the procedures and protocols we have put in place have been highly successful, and we have, without interruption, been able to keep on-site instruction going every day. I feel for those around us who haven't been as fortunate. The possibility does exist, though, that at some point we may find ourselves needing to go to remote instruction for a short period of time and potentially a longer period of time. So knowing that, and as I reported to the board, now we have deployed all of the technology, our staff to do that. We are looking at the likely possibility of doing a test remote only day. Ms. Canavo is working on what those schedules would look like. So in essence, we could decide a day and say, we're going to try this out. Everybody is going to learn from home one day, still would count as a day of instruction. But we believe if we can do that proactively, then if there are any adjustments that need to be made or things that need to be ironed out, that we could do that before it happens. I think everybody remembers March 18th of last year. And again, kudos to all of our folks and everything they did to make it work. But if we have the opportunity to be better prepared for that, we are working on the logistics to make that happen. So stay tuned. We got a little bit more tweaking on schedules to do. And then I do think we would be looking to do that by the end of this month if we could do it. Okay. Thanks to staff and parents. I have regularly through public comments at our meetings and my messenger communications lauded the incredible dedication and efforts of our faculty and staff. They have done an exceptional job of rising to the challenges of the COVID environment to innovate and to continue to provide meaningful learning opportunities for all of our students. So to them, I once again say thank you. Over the past several days, I have had the opportunity to speak to a number of our parents and families about the challenges that they too face in a COVID learning environment. I would be remiss if I did not recognize their efforts, sacrifices, and partnership with us. They too have been exceptional, so to them, I also say thank you. Next on, before the upcoming holiday, this evening, both in person and remote, I wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving holiday. Jen mentioned the board retreat earlier. We have confirmed the date of December 19th, which was the preferred date of all board members in the evening. 9th, I'm sorry. In the evening will be our retreat. I was actually scheduled to have a phone conference with the person from NISBA today. She had to reschedule till Friday. She had something come up. But what she shared with me is once we speak on Friday, she'll then have conversation with Jeff. They will identify the facilitator that they will assign to us and then put together the agenda based on those conversations. So I would expect we would see more detail around that by the end of next week. One other thing I did not list, but I would like to speak to if I could. I ran into one of your former board colleagues this weekend who was very excited and anxious to be able to see the building. He said, I know when we're planning to come back this year, things were turned upside down, but we had talked about the possibility about, upon completion, of doing an open house. We know we can't do a typical open house now, but I was able to speak with Aaron Cagwin, our public information specialist last week. When he was on campus, he actually has quite a bit of background in video, and he is very interested in working with us on a virtual open house showcasing the new facility. So again, we just started, I heard it at church last Sunday morning. I talked to Aaron on Thursday, so it's definitely in the infancy stages. But I'm really excited about exploring that further and seeing what we can do so we can showcase what we have done. That's all. That's that?
All I want for Christmas.
All you want for Christmas. All right, I'm gonna let Jen come up front for her principal's comment.
When you're ready.
Right. Thank you for having me here this evening. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the different events that we've had over the course of October and early November. The staff and students have worked really hard to keep some ongoing traditions while keeping in mind being able to engage our kids at home and the ones here in person. We held our annual pumpkin contest. The kids were just voting at the end of last week to celebrate the different winners, and they did that through a Google form with pictures completed both by Mrs. Ford and Mrs. Lang, our library media specialist. So we're excited to have our winners for that. We also had our annual Red Ribbon Week celebration, which was really nice this time of year because our kids at home participated, our kids that were here participated. They sent in pictures, and it was really just nice to see our kids at home part of the school community because it's hard being home for them, and it was good to see. Whether they were in their living rooms or they were down in their classrooms, they were all able to participate and be part of that. And our PE teachers worked to bring those lessons to the kids at home as well. And then last but not least, we didn't have our pumpkin run down on the backfield, but hopefully you got to see a little bit of that all throughout Menands. Thank you to Mr. Nevins and Mr. Maslin for working with our PE teachers to make that happen. And it was extended for an extra week last week because we had a really nice stretch of nice weather that kind of combated the not so nice weather the week before. And then Mrs. Lapari from the PTA board made a new version of pumpkin run ribbons. There were little mini pumpkins that were carved, and they came out really, really nice. I saw them on some of the kids' desks today. So thank you to our community and our board members and our faculty and staff for making that happen this school year. We had picture day last week for our in-person students. We are looking at how to make that possible for our virtual students for picture makeup day and offering possibly some different hours and looking at how we can include them in our tradition of picture day. And then also many of our families use that for gifts. So making sure that we can make that opportunity available for them. We have parent-teacher conferences coming up on November 20th. They will be a half day for us. We will be doing them remotely with our families, and teachers will be speaking to progress and how things are going for both our in-person students and our students learning at home. And then last but not least, we have a couple of events coming up in November. Today, we kicked off our Ronald McDonald House Charities Readathon that Courtney continues to share for us through the PTA. We couldn't have a big assembly this year, but the Ronald McDonald House shared videos that our teachers showed in our classrooms, and we will be collecting those donations online, and we can take them in person, but of course we're encouraging online participation. And those funds go to support our local Ronald McDonald House down in Albany. We also have our book fair that started today. Again, it will be a virtual event. There's a virtual catalog. We sent home some information about that. And the book fair not only gets books into the hands of children at an affordable rate, we also get a percentage back to help support our school library here as well. And then last but not least, our apparel sale is out there. So please take a look and participate, and we will show our school pride on Fridays. That's all I have. Thank you.
We'll move along to miscellaneous. Anybody have anything?
I have a couple of them.
Sure.
Just about the readathon, thanks Mrs. Canavo. I just wanted to share that the reading month did start today, so I don't know if everybody's kids in person brought home a calendar. If not, the calendar is going to be posted on the website. You can have the kids print one off and keep track at home. The reading month is November 9th through December 4th. We're trying to get middle school kids to participate this year. All you middle school parents, bug your kids to try and do some reading this month and get some credit for that. There's also an upcoming PTA meeting. The calendar has it as Tuesday, November 17th, 6:30. Hopefully that's correct. No.
Courtney, I'll personally invite you to my house to purge my.
It's that.
They were trying to come up with some kind of challenge for the middle schoolers. I'm not sure how that worked out. Maybe that's what we I don't have to let me know.
Oh,
Thank you, Courtney. Anybody else?
Just maybe a few questions, if anything. I know we're working on getting remote learners back into school, right? And we're on that weird uptick in New York and the capital region and things going on. And I've heard some information from other districts having, with the holidays coming and things about keeping kids out of school. Right, I was not really a fan from the start, right? And every morning when I felt the gas station for my kids to show up, school first. But how do we feel about bringing more people into the building? Here we are with things and the possibility of things being a little worse, especially holiday time where family members are seeing other family members that they should probably be seeing during a pandemic.
So I feel very confident in the procedures and protocols we have in place. I think our history is showing they're working. I think that said, to your point, Bill, we rely on other people to do their part too. Actually, I mentioned Aaron earlier. We are in the process of putting together a direct communication about the holidays and travel in particular and the implications. Something similar went out to our staff today. So if we continue to work hard collectively and do the things that we've put in place, I am highly confident. There is that little bit of sense of uncertainty because that relies on everybody doing that. I certainly understand and appreciate that. You know, you have to remember from day one, we were prepared to have every single kid back in this building, not because we could, in large part due to the project, due to the space that we have, due to the numbers that we have, and it will look different, and there will be spaces that may need to be used. Really hard internally with our staff to continue to communicate the importance of not getting lackadaisical, not giving in to that COVID fatigue, and we just keep hammering that message away and effectively. It's the safety and well-being of our kids, and it's important.
So as a community member, I say to kids all over the place, put your mask back on.
Masks up.
I don't know, it still irks me, right? And I assume they're doing it in school and they're being good about it. Otherwise, we probably would have heard something. But even off campus and out, put your mask on, right? We're in a school building, right? Put your mask on. Ms. Canal mentioned the number 107 response to the possible 225 and the K through 5 coming back. Are those just responses, or are those people looking?
100, we asked everybody to respond because it includes transportation too. So that total is 225 total. We've heard back from 123. We've kind of been communicating with each other because we know if we look at the numbers, we're going to panic. And every time a number comes in, depending where that number sits, it could change things.
Sure.
So we kind of have resolved ourselves that we're not looking at the number until all of the data is in.
Because then you'll know what classrooms need to be spread out or whatever.
Correct.
Have a better handle on that.
As tempting as it is to look.
Just lastly, and I'm curious, and I don't know if you even have information on it or where we stand with, I'd be curious to find out where our remote learners are academically thus far. I kind of have a handle on middle schoolers because I know a bunch of them and I'm constantly talking to them. And I'm not sure where the K-5 group is, but I'd be curious to hear if there's any information or update you could get on academics, where the remote kids versus the in-person kids academically fall with testing.
and I think we can certainly prepare that and bring it back to the next meeting. What I'll say off the cuff, and Ms. Canavo, chime in if you have more to add or feel differently. You remember last year when we went remote and we were worried about engagement in kids, and it was all of our kids who were remote at that time. We really were tedious about monitoring all of our kids to identify those kids who we believed were fully engaged, those kids who were somewhat engaged, and those kids who were not engaged at all. And we kind of took a case management approach, and it was all hands on deck to first work with those not engaged at all kids and with their families. And once we kind of got them up and running and going, we moved to our less engaged kids. And I think we were pretty successful in doing that. And I think we've taken pretty much a similar approach this year. Keep in mind, we've added ammunition to our student support team with the added social worker, her working together with Ms. Vandenberg, our school counselor, with Ms. Amatrano for our special education students, and under Jen's guidance have really honed in on those kids who we're worried about, just like we would if they were here. So that's kind of like an overarching answer to your question. We are very attentive to our kids and providing outreach, guidance, direction, support is needed, but I think we could certainly pull something together more definitive by the December board meeting.
I would add just one thing on the most bill is asking for, maybe something that is attendance, not just their academics, but attendance and how they're participating, if they're lucky, understanding that, you know, if there was a scare, they have to be home for 2 weeks, that will help, I think.
Yeah, and our attendance numbers in general, and we do daily attendance for both our remote and in-person students. I would say, again, this is not the data speaking, this is me looking at the attendance lists every day, but our attendance, our absent students are less now than they historically have been.
That's good to hear.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Everyone's filling out the form yet by 7:30 in the morning?
We're getting closer. We got a couple of holdouts.
I'm sure they're not going to take over.
Thank you for that.
Anybody else?
I would just say just continually thank you for the work.
Thanks.
I want to have an opportunity to wish everyone a happy holidays, safe and relaxing holiday break. And we have the 4 days, 3.5 teachers, and 3 days for the kids, and 2.5 days for the teachers. Is the way.
No, we got the 3 though. We are looking at that remote day potentially.
Okay, gotcha. Have a
No problem.
safe and relaxing holiday. Back home. Comical and humorous during the holidays when you can't see all your relatives because it's not safe. Have a Zoom call with your family, and you'll laugh your ass off because elderly, young people, kids can't hear. It's actually some of the best comedy and probably getting a lot better now. So that's supposed to when they're face to face over the holidays. So happy holidays, everybody. All staff and everybody. Everything else? Okay.
I'm looking, Jeff, I do not see any comments, but we can go ahead and,
The BOE.
why don't we just announce one more time, we are at the public comments section. Public comments can be submitted to boecomments@menands.org. And we'll give folks a few minutes if they would like to add any.
Yeah, I'll read off informational material. We have a couple things that Dr. Long noted. It's not on the school calendar, but there's a session Wednesday, Veterans Day. So be appealing folks. Parent teacher conference day is Thursday. It's Wednesday the 20th, I believe, right? I'm sorry, Thursday the 20th. Thursday the 20th is an early release that day, and there are parent conferences that day. And Thanksgiving holiday break is the 25th. Friday. And our next board meeting is Monday, the 14th, December at 6:30 p.m. We have a retreat with the board on the 9th, 5 to 9 p.m. That is here, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Public comment session.
Yeah, the 20th is Friday. Is the parent teacher thing?
20th, which is
I look at the right calendar.
the Friday.
This Friday, right? So is it Friday the 20th, or is it Thursday the 19th?
Let us double check that and we will make sure we send it out in the reminder that goes on Messenger tomorrow. We'll make sure it is on the district calendar webpage and we'll put it on Facebook.
The website has it Friday the 20th. I don't know what the printed calendar
Nobody has the printed calendar in front of them. We all have our phones.
has.
We'll double check and make sure everybody knows.
The public comment, please don't during the public comment session, members of the community may ask board on agenda and non-agenda items. The president may limit the remarks to the speakers to time. People must identify themselves and topic they would like to make remarks. We do appreciate everyone's cooperation. Once again, that is BOE comment at menands.org. Anything. One and everything in here. Chat on
Nope, I looked at the chat too.
okay. There's nothing further.
Actually, I would like to request that the board enter into executive session so we can discuss my employment with the district.
We need adjourn public session first. We need a motion for that.
I'll make a motion to adjourn public session.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? Public session, so we now need to discuss for that.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Opposed? We are in executive session. We probably need about 2 minutes, correct, folks? 1 minute, 2 minutes?
And I will pause the recording. I do not anticipate we will take any action when we return to public session. I do believe it will be brief, but certainly people are welcome to stay on should they choose to do so.